On the 20th, there was a meeting of the government of Northern Cyprus, at which a law was passed called the Law on the Acquisition and Long-Term Lease of Real Estate by a Foreigner. There are a whole bunch of rumors going around the island. They scared everyone. Oh, everything is gone. 60 dunams of land can be bought only in one place, that is, you can use this service once. This is sad, of course, because many people are building. And then how to live? Because Northern Cyprus lives at the expense of foreigners. The same President Ersin Tatar, right? You know, yes, that his family is from the Crimea. Yes, they are Crimean Tatars. When I first heard it, I thought, well, that's it, it's all gone, the end. The conflict went on for 10 years, imagine, there was a massacre for 10 years. That is, if you bought a property for rent, then you should not sell it for 5 years. That is, if your contract is not registered with the land registry and the tax service, then the contract is considered not concluded. That is, the local government lacks, of course, education. That is, the fine will be from 100 to 300,000 euros. Hello, you are on the channel, Live by the Sea, and I am its regular presenter Oleg Konevin. Today we will have a very interesting and very important topic for Northern Cyprus. As we know, on the 20th there was a meeting of the government of Northern Cyprus, at which a law was passed called the Law on the Acquisition of Long-Term Rental of Real Estate by a Foreigner. Well, 3 additional laws have been adopted to this law, one of which is called the Law on Property on Floors of Easements, then the Law on Contracts Amendments, and the Law on Registration of Transactions with Real Estate Agents. Amendments were also made. But the most important law that we are most concerned about is the Law on the Acquisition of Real Estate by Foreigners in Northern Cyprus. There are a whole bunch of different rumors going around the island now. They scared everyone. Oh, everything is terrible, everything is gone. That's it, now we need to sell the property and leave. It is becoming impossible to live in the country. When I first heard it, I also thought, well, that's it, everything is gone. It's all Hannah. I received a text message from the Northern company asking them to calm down for now, everything will be fine. The law is still raw. But we ourselves understand that Northern Cyprus is a small country. If they say that 400,000 people officially live, well, even if 800,000 people are not officially living. But in fact, if you compare it with some other countries, then actually, it is a microstate. Roughly speaking, as some say, the Banana Republic. And so, let's just try to figure out what is said in this law and what to expect in the future, what changes for the better or for the worse. Let's figure it out together. Of course, I am not a lawyer. That is, some say that let's do a lawyer's consultation. Of course, a lawyer is the person who can thoroughly go through every paragraph of the law, read it and fully explain it to you. But in fact, the law is not complicated. In principle, everything is simple and clear. I will tell you everything now, but I would like to touch on the background of this law. Why did he come out? What political movements are there in Northern Cyprus and why is this law needed at all? That is, let's look at it, how to say not within the framework of this law. But let's look a little wider. Why did they adopt this law anyway? Who passed it? It's also very important what kind of people. And why? After all, everyone is so worried that everything will be very bad and scary. So who is interested in this topic? Please like it. Leave your comments. What do you think about this law? And who hasn't subscribed to my channel? Of course, subscribe. And in order for as many people as possible to find out the truth about Northern Cyprus, then please share this video with your friends. We will start from afar. What is Northern Cyprus? Northern Cyprus is a small independent state located on the island of Cyprus. The island of Cyprus gained its independence only in 1962. In 1972 and in 1973, it was divided into 2 parts, the Turkish part and the southern part. In fact, it turned out to be divided into 4 parts. This is not the topic of this video, but we still have 4 parts in Northern Cyprus. One part belongs to 60%, belongs to the southern Tiber, 33% belongs to Northern Cyprus, about 8% belongs to England, and there is also a buffer zone that many forget about. It actually reaches several kilometers in places, and it divides the entire island into 2 parts. That is, It is also a very large territory that does not belong to anyone. A buffer zone where peacekeeping forces stand UN troops. That is, in fact, we get 4 parts on the island. The law is very cruel. He says that foreigners can buy only one property in Northern Cyprus and 1 dönüm of land. Well, either one or the other. Or if now a foreigner buys a house that stands on a plot of land, then there may be a little more land. Previously, this was allowed up to 5 dönüms. 1 dönüm is 100 square meters of land or 339 acres. Now we have made a limit of 5 dönüms. You buy an old house, for example, and it stands on a plot of 5 to it. That is, you can arrange it without any problems. But they made an explanation here. They wrote that you can't demolish this house anymore and put a new one in its place. Yes, you can restore it, but you can't build a new one anymore. Or the second house, the third house on this site. That is, if you bought one house with a plot of land, it should remain one house in the plot. Well, we'll tell you about the law a little later. Let's tell you the background. Cyprus was divided into 4 parts, and only a small part remained a Turkish Cypriot. And in what years did this happen? That is, it was 1973. And let's see who is currently passing the laws that exist in Northern Cyprus. That is, we succeed, of course. This is the most important person in Northern Cyprus. This is Ersin Tata, the president of Northern Cyprus. Ersin Tata was born on September 7, 1960, that is, as it turns out, in 73 to 74, he was 13 to 14 years old. He saw all the events, because he was born in Nicosia, and the massacre began in Nicosia back in 63. That is, the peacekeeping troops came to Nicosia already in 64. That is, he was 4 years old and some kind of massacre had already begun. It was still 10 years before Turkey came. That is, the child grew up in a family where, in principle, there were already conflicts. Why I'm talking about conflicts and the whole thing, you'll understand a little further. The next, second person on whom the policy of Northern Cyprus depends is his deputy, President of the Assembly of the Republic Zalu Terep. He was born in 1956. He was already 18 years old at the time of 1974. If we look at him, it can be seen that he has a military bearing and he was actually a military officer and he took part in these 2 operations, as they were called operations, and a happy world is when these 2 operations of Turkey to liberate Cyprus and protect its citizens. He was directly involved in military operations, so he is also familiar with this. Further, if we look, the Minister of Economy and Energy, Altan Okoglu, born in 1966, he made up this whole division. Then we'll see, the Prime Minister, Ünal Özdal, that is, at the time of the separation, he was 20 years old. The Prime Minister was born in 1955, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs was born in 1953, Taksin Ergel. And it turns out that this law is called on the acquisition of real estate by foreigners. That is, it is the Minister of Foreign Affairs who is most responsible for this. Foreign Minister Tarsan Ergü, he calls himself a Turkish nationalist. He considers himself a Turk, just who lives in Cyprus. It is clear that, whatever his attitude to everything else, it is embedded in this political field of his. And of course all the ministers, all the governments, it belongs to the National Unity Party. That is, we have a united Russia in Russia. And this is where the People's Unity Party turns out. It's called UBP. Here is its chairman. The party used to be Ersin Tata. Then he became president, he was changed, and now the chairman of the party turns out to be Ünal Özdal. I have talked with many of them. They say that we are worried about the security of our country, that foreigners are a threat to the security of the country. I didn't understand why. For example, if, we look at such developing countries that were generally poor, for example Singapore. In general, people were beggars there. The salary was in the range of $10. It was considered a normal salary so that people could somehow live. And when the new head of government came, they redid everything there. On the contrary, they reduced taxes, let in foreign capital, and the country began to develop. That is, the population there is huge now. No one controls them there. How many foreigners are there? How many locals? But everything is very good now. It is one of the richest countries in the world. The same can be said, for example, about Dubai. Because they reduced taxes and investments went there. Yes, of course, we all say that oil and gas have been found in Dubai. Due to the fact that there is oil, the state has a lot of money there, and they are developing their country. But yes, but in fact, if we just look at Dubai's GDP, we will see that in fact oil accounts for only 10% of GDP. But there is no such thing here. That is, 10% of everything is oil, everything. And the rest is just all the other additional income and expenses. Yes, of course, unfortunately, the local government lacks education. If we look, for example, at what it takes to become president of Northern Cyprus, what are the requirements? The requirements are very minimal. The first requirement is that he must be born on the island, live for 5 years, have a secondary education, and be just over 30 years old. That is, in principle, the requirements are very low. Therefore, it turns out that the country is run by not quite literate people. I see that if you hire a good top manager who can look at the economy on a more global scale, it would be very good and everything would change in Northern Cyprus. And so it turns out that they have, for example, they did. So in the last program I talked about market analysis, the situation that is happening in general in the world and specifically in Northern Cyprus. And so in Northern Cyprus they made their country's program for 3 years, in my opinion, 2024, 2025 and 2026. And they planned that the state's revenues would increase. And moreover, they have done so that state revenues in 2024 will have to increase by 30% compared to 2023. Where will it come from? It was clear that they were still writing at the time. I said at the time that it would be just they want to start controlling foreigners so that foreigners pay taxes. Do foreigners pay taxes or not? Look, now we have done a tax on real estate registration in the country. Every person buying an apartment pays 6% tax for registration in the land registry or, in our words, in the topu. That is, 6% is just the registration of the contract and the registration of the contract still costs 0.5% in tax. That is 5%. And then getting ahead, that is, a full certificate of ownership, that you own this apartment and a piece of land under this apartment, but in certain proportions how many floors there are and so on, and for this swing you also need to pay 6% of this, the entire registration gets 5%. Of course, plus VAT is still mandatory. In total, it turns out 5%. I said that Cyprus is an island with 2 states, South Cyprus and North Cyprus. And in Southern Cyprus, just the MDS turns out to be 5%. You buy real estate, pay 5% VAT. And Northern Cyprus is also looking at each other. They saw how many percentages there were and did about the same thing to themselves. If you add all the percentages together, it turns out to be 5%. Well, but in fact, they introduced this law. It turns out to be a promotion. Previously, there was just a registration of the contract at 0.5%, and Tapu took 300 lira there. And now they would take 6 in Tapu percent, and Kachin another 6%. But Kachinik used to cost 6%, but there was always a discount and everyone paid for it at all 3%. And now they have introduced 12%, it's all working out. And let's look at the statistics, how many people actually buy real estate and how many register it. If I've already just talked in my videos, so I won't dwell on it too much. Look, roughly speaking, for example, an apartment in Northern Cyprus was sold in 6 months, roughly speaking. Out of these 16,000 apartments there, 3,000 applications were submitted to Tafu 4, to get Kachin for real estate. It's already working out, look how many times less. And the most important thing is that of these 3,000 applications that have been submitted for Kachin, the bulk of the population here is local and people from Turkey. And all foreigners taken in a month, they borrow only 10% of those who applied. That is, out of 3,000, about 300 applications from foreigners. Let's divide 12,000 by 300, and we will get that only 1 person out of 40. 1 in 40 wants to register for himself Kachin. In principle, it even turns out to be only 2% of people closer to 5% who want to apply Kachin. Kachin, it's very small. The state just, you see, They expected that they would receive taxes from this. And as a result, neither the tax was increased, but they began to receive even less than they received before, because no one registers at all. And they decided to tighten up the case. Therefore, the new law specifies a certain time frame for how this should be done, and very huge, downright huge fines have been made. Why the fines? Let's go back to the law again. Why the fines? Look, the fact is that they adopted a budget for 2024, but they did not raise money at the end of the year, closer to the middle of the year. What do they have to do? They have already made some plans anyway, what they will do, where they spend the money, but there is no money. And now, for example, the government of Northern Cyprus is taking out a loan. Imagine, the loan is already taking 3 billion liras. 3 billion lire. That is, if we want, we can look in open sources, all this is there. That is, the state is already short of 3 billion liras. It is clear that the state is trying to raise money. They have already increased the tax on slot machines, although there were some small strikes, but they increased it. That is, they collect from there. All normal people pay taxes. This is where we come to what this law is made for. In order to actually collect those taxes that were supposed to be collected when the tax on the purchase of real estate by foreigners was increased, but they don't collect it. The second reason, a more global reason, is why they decided to adopt this law. Why are we talking about security? For example, national security. Look, now there is a war between Israel and Palestine. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with us at all. But actually, for example, Zerlutor, we'll see what he says. He says that when he was a child, he looked where he was born in 56 in Larnaca. Can you imagine? In the year 56. Then, when these persecutions began, that is, in the year 64 to 63, he was forced to move from Larnaca to Istila and was already studying at school in Istila. That is, it turns out that he became a refugee and that he lived in tents in order to just somehow survive, because it was impossible to live there. The same thing is actually happening in Palestine. If we look at where Israel came from, it turns out that Palestine was an English colony, just as Cyprus was also an English colony. And then, it turns out, after the war, well, a little before the war, they brought this part of the population and so on. But after the war, the whole thing, after the Second World War, it all basically started. That is, in the territory where Israel is now located, exactly in this place, by the 46th, 47th year, about 800,000 Palestinians lived. There were a total of 125,000 people living there. But 800,000 Palestinians were forced to leave their places in 48. Imagine if we say that Southern Cyprus was offended by the fact that about 300,000 Southerners were forced to leave their territory. First of all, they were given land on the south side, then they are compensated for this land with money, then nothing like this happens to the Palestinians. That is, they just came. A small community gained a foothold in one territory and slowly ousted the Palestinians, and now this Gaza Strip, they also bomb civilians and everything else. That is, the Muslim world, as we know, especially Turkey, they do not recognize Israel at all, so this is wildness for them. And the fact that they are watching this now is also wild for them. And that's why they still have such concern that maybe, in fact, foreigners will come, they will buy everything here, and then they will simply expel their locals and Cyprus. Especially since they also have a conflict with Southern Cyprus, it's still the same that Southerners believe that this is their land. And so they think, you never know, there will be a lot of foreigners here and then they will lose their statehood. Well, in fact, they can also be understood, because the people I mentioned, that all the ministers and the president, yes, they were just born in those years that were before the conflict. And this conflict went on for 10 years. There was a massacre. The Greeks were the first to slaughter the Turkish Cypriots. Our ministers, they have seen this whole thing, and therefore, of course, they are very afraid. That is, on the one hand, of course, I would like to say, yes, guys, it's a pity that you lack education, that you look at the problems more broadly. But all our complexes, they come from childhood. And here, it turns out, they all experience such pressure from the other side in childhood. That's why they get such rejection. They are a little afraid. Yes, and that's why they worry about their independence. So let's forgive them their little fears. Well, what should I do? Yes, they have fears. Although, if you look at it, you can say that they are also not quite local. That is, if we look, for example, at the same President Arsen Tatar, you know that his family comes from Crimea. These are the Crimean Tatars, who moved from Crimea to Cyprus at the beginning of the century. And it turns out that his father was already born here, Arsena Tatar. Grandfather, grandmother, they were born in Crimea. At that time it was the Russian Crimea. They were born in the Russian Crimea. It's still a Turkic group of languages. Well, yes, it turns out that they are already everything. Now they are not Turkish Cypriots, new laws, and they are no longer considered Ibanji. But it turns out that we come here, become Ibanji. Of course, the law is not on our side. But let's take a close look at what else is happening in Cyprus. Now let's look at the political situation in the country. The president of Northern Cyprus is elected for 5 years. The first president ruled for 42 years until 2005, and the next ones ruled for 5 years. 5 years of the second, 5 years of the third, and so on. And by 2020, Ersin Tatar came to power in the elections. With the previous president, they scored an equal number of votes in the first round, and therefore there was a second round of elections. In the second round of elections, Ersin Tatar actually won by a small margin, and so he came to power in 2020, and it turns out that everything seems to be fine. But look what happens. In 2020, a lot of foreigners just went. It became very expensive. As I said, real estate became more expensive, food became more expensive, everything became more expensive, and the local population, of course, has become impoverished during this time. Now, if there are elections, it is clear that Ersin Tatar does not have the support of a large population to stay in power. And what should he do? As I understand it, I want to rule. All the presidents of the countries, they want to extend their terms of office. And here it is clear that in order to extend it, it turns out, it is necessary to take some populist measures. That is, the party of SDB's competitors, which is most embarrassed, it just made as its populist goal, aimed just opposite Ibanji. They say that foreigners are to blame for everything. Here they are buying up real estate. Everything has gone up in price. They are not doing anything here. We need to get rid of them. And the people support them on this. Therefore, the elections, roughly speaking, will follow in a year. There will be elections in 2025. That is, there is 1 year left before the elections. And of course, the government is also taking some measures. First, taxes must be collected. The choice is also on the nose. The authorities also do not want to miss it. Therefore, they also take such measures to somehow begin to control Ibanji, once, and secondly, to collect taxes. That is, in principle, everything is clear here. What ways do they see to achieve this? In addition, in order to collect taxes and somehow tighten the requirements for Ibanji, they want to bring Turkish citizens here as much as possible. As we say, there is an official document by which we can judge something. But, you see, I'm telling you a lot. We still haven't reached the document. The same applies to the presidential election. That is, there are, as it were, laws, there are sub-legislative acts, and most importantly, the intention for which all this is being done. And here is one of the intentions in order for example, Ersin Tatars to remain in power. They considered that they lacked 120,000 Turks, loyal people who could vote for Ersin Tatars. Where can I get them? And so they decided to make a preferential program for migrants from Turkey so that they could move here. That is, they are allowed to buy. If foreigners are usually allowed to buy 1 property, then Turks are allowed to buy 3 properties already. And if all real estate registration costs 6%, here they have made 3% for them. It is also easy to get a passport with a preferential mortgage. That is, if their plans actually succeed, then by the presidential election there will be more people who agree with the Tatar and everyone will vote for. Moreover, the party that is in Turkey, it turns out to be a sister party to the party of Northern Cyprus. That is, this is another +1 such political step towards why such a law is being adopted. And I want to read to you the statement of Darsan Ogus. Darsan Ogus is the Minister of the Interior. From his words, you will understand why this law was adopted. He says that the TRNC will never become Palestine. Do you understand? That is, they still think that the same scenario could happen here. Israel and Palestine, which happened, it turns out, in the Middle East. And in fact, it's not far from here to Israel, just fly over the sea and that's it. This is what the Minister of the Interior says. He also stressed that. Let me read it out. The minister noted that the TRNC lands are protected by a revolutionary law that guarantees these lands. Darsan Ogus stressed that the recent alarming statement about the interest of foreigners in the TRNC does not reflect the truth, and that the TRNC will never become Palestine. And at the legislative level, citizens of the Republic of Turkey are granted the right to purchase 3 apartments, citizens of other countries are granted the right to purchase 1 apartment. And he wrote that everything needs to be fixed and noticed, and that at least 20% of housing projects in areas open for development should be sold to citizens of the TRNC and citizens of the Turkish Republic, so that at least 20% are friendly countries. It doesn't seem to restrict the rights in any way. But in fact, if we just look at the sales statistics, as I said before, even in those years, the old ones, before there was this law, out of 15,000 apartments, 3,000 apartments were bought by locals and immigrants from the Turkish Republic, from Turkey. That is, in principle, this is exactly what it is. 3,000 out of 15,000, this is also 20%. That is, there is really nothing else new and scary and limiting. They just put it in statistics, brought it and translated it into a legislative act. Therefore, there is nothing to be afraid of. That is, there are no special restrictions. Well, yes, they just don't want any entire neighborhoods to be purely foreign. For example, the same Caesar. For example, if we take Caesar Reza. Yes, he said there that this is generally a Russian quarter and so on. But in fact, no matter how there is no Russian quarter, there are not even 50% from one country. And in the new law, we are just talking about this GPA. There is also such a restriction written there so that immigrants with the same citizenship do not have more than 50% in the housing package. So, let's look at the law now. Now let's take a closer look at the law, which is called, On the Acquisition and Long-Term Lease of Real Estate by Foreigners. This law was adopted on May 20, 2024. Well, not the law. It's old, 2008. And amendments were adopted to it in 2024. The purpose of this law is written in the first line for what it was adopted. It is designed to ensure the registration of purchase and sale agreements by foreigners. That is, the most important thing in this law is for foreigners to register their real estate. On the one hand, this is good for foreigners themselves. What is the situation in the judicial practice of the Northern Cyprus? If there is a contract, any contract will set up subcontractors, some for the construction of a house, and so on. If your contract is not registered with the land registry and the tax service, then the contract is considered not concluded. That is, here is the usual contractual relationship in our countries. We just, for example, have a developer and we signed the documents, signed, the developer stamped. We have a contract. This contract is considered a valid contract. You can go to court and sue something, but in Northern Cyprus it's a little bit wrong. In order for the contract to be real, the seals of the land registry and taxes must be at the end of the contract, and only in that it is registered, and such an agreement is accepted in court as a real contract, and only such an agreement can then be attributed to the electric grid, or locally called TIPTEC, so that electricity is connected to you. The same thing, in order for the water to be connected to you, you must show exactly the registered contract. Also, registration contracts are also requested by muhtars when you receive a certificate of residence, or about the place of your property, or about the place where you are currently renting. That is, contracts must be registered. That is, in principle, this is your security. And of course, the security of the country lies in the fact that if they have made a 5% tax, then they want to collect it. Otherwise, they have introduced a tax, but they cannot collect it. So they are forced to introduce this tax and make this control. This law also concerns me very much, because I also get quite a lot of real estate. I have an unfinished house in which I have already invested £300,000. I also have 2 land names that are located on the seashore, also, which are not bad. I also have an unfinished apartment that I am building in Estelle for myself. And I have an office where we are now. He is also on the property. We also paid about £200,000 for him, which also turns out that I have £700,000 worth of property. That is, in principle, I am also interested in making everything clear and clean. So I have been working very closely on this law for several days to figure it out. And now I want to tell you what is new in this law. Let's read the law more carefully and closely, and try to understand what it says. Firstly, it is intended to ensure the registration of purchase and sale agreements, and the following point, with the help of these rules, it is supposed to eliminate factors constitutionally affecting the property regime in the country from the point of view of public order and national security. This is all in the first paragraph. Then we flip through, nothing interesting here. So, there's nothing interesting here either. And now we turn to the article. Article 4, paragraph 3. Again, we see that it is written that it can threaten national security or public order, because when people do not register their real estate, the state does not receive money from this either. Then we turn over the pages. Item 7, Article 8. The most important thing that a foreigner can buy. And here we read, an amendment to Article 8. Foreign individuals or legal entities may purchase one immovable property, subject to obtaining a purchase permit from the Council of Ministers in accordance with the rules of this article, as indicated below. And there the points are obtained. There is nothing new, as it used to be, that a foreigner can buy only one real estate object, so these principles are written in the new law. The only thing that has changed is that if the property being purchased is a separate house, the plot area cannot exceed 5 dynams or 3,300 square meters or 815,447 acres of land. And before it was possible to buy a house that stands on a plot of 5 dynes of land, but it has halved. And an explanation has also been made. No other house, apartment, or residence can be built on this purchased plot. That is, if you have already bought a house, then please live in it. The only thing is that you can restore it, but you can't completely demolish and build a new one. The next item, under item 2, is new. The government of Northern Cyprus wants as many countries as possible to recognize it. So far, only Turkey recognizes it, and therefore it is written here that if these foreign citizens belong to a country that recognizes the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus and grants them the same right to citizens of Turkish Northern Cyprus to purchase real estate in their country, then they are allowed to purchase 3 houses or 3 apartments. Roughly speaking, 3 properties. They do this so that as many people as possible complain to their governments, so that the government also makes concessions and finally recognizes Northern Cyprus. Well, the idea, of course, is not bad. I do not know if the complaints of several people will affect the recognition of the country. I think it is unlikely. And the next point, before a foreign individual or legal entity applies to the ministry for the acquisition of real estate, condominiums or a condominium easement must be established in accordance with the law on condominium and condominium easement. That is, it says that before a foreigner, buying an apartment, in order to get a permit, must be created as a condominium. It used to be like that. We used to call it simply, the developer must hand over the entire complex and then you can register the land. In principle, they have just written it down in the Legislative Act so that it is clear to everyone. They mean that not only everything should be built, but some kind of homeowners association should be created that would manage this property so that there would be no such abandoned complexes or networks. Well, the next point. It says here that foreign individuals, when applying for a permit, must pay 20% of the current minimum wage in order to receive a pension. That is, when they apply for a property permit, the title costs 6%, but it is paid after you get the permit. And in order to apply for a permit, you simply pay a fee of 20% of the minimum wage. The minimum wage is now 1,000 euros. This is 35,000 liras. 7,000 liras or £160 will need to be paid for submitting an application. In principle, it's not that expensive. Of course, it used to cost, I don't know, in my opinion, 300 to 350 lira, but it made it a little more expensive. £160 is not such a large amount to worry too much about. Further, the most interesting thing, within 75 working days from the date of publication of the official explanatory decree of the Council of Ministers on the loss of immovable property, the owner must register his property or the permit for the real estate object is automatically cancelled. It means that after a person has received permission from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he is given 75 working days to pay for this title and receive it. That's 75 days. Sometimes people, when they send a request for permission, they get it. They need, in principle, to obtain a residence permit for the property, just to get a dossier. Dossier is just such a small document. Look what dossier is. That is, these are standard documents when you apply for real estate. When you have given all the documents, they give you such a small coupon, which is called dossier. This dossier is enough for you to get a residence permit. Well, of course. Then you have a purchase and sale agreement, a certificate from Mukhtar, and with these documents you are already applying for a residence permit. That is, to obtain a residence permit for real estate, you need such a document. That's why people get it, no further paperwork goes on. That's why they say that after the permission to obtain the title has already been issued, you are given 75 days to get the title or kachin. The title or kachin has already been issued in your name. The next item is written. However, buyers are required to pay all taxes and fees arising in connection with the purchase and sale transaction within 30 business days from the date of publication of the purchase permit. That is, 75 days are given to receive this kachin and issue it in your name. But you have to pay for this kachin within 30 business days. I see, right? That is, it was simply not written in the law before. You submitted the documents, when you received them, you will not receive them. And then it turns out they limit the whole thing. You have to pay within 30 business days, and you have to complete this case within 75 days. And they made such a point, otherwise the decision of the Council of Ministers is automatically cancelled. And if you missed it, then the decision was cancelled and then you want to apply again for a permit to purchase real estate. Well, as I say, getting ahead here, then you will have to pay again later, but pay double. That is, if we pay 7,000 liras for the first time, according to the new minimum wage, yes, then next time you will pay 14,000 liras. But in principle, it is also not very much, that is, £320. It does not really affect the value of any real estate. That is, any real estate is still worth about £100,000 new. £100,000, £300 is 0.3%. Here's an interesting point that didn't exist before, but actually it sounds so scary. They decided to do it. Restrict foreigners so that foreigners with the same nationality do not live in the same complex. That is, they made a restriction. That is, they began to limit our rights. According to statistics, it rarely happens that people from the same country with the same citizenship live in the same complex. Yes, it happens, for example, that Russian speakers live in the same complex there, roughly speaking. Here is Abelia. Such a complex is interesting, where many Russian speakers live and mostly all come from Belarus. But if we look at their citizenship, they may come from Belarus, but in addition to citizenship in Belarus, someone has citizenship in Turkey, someone in Russia, someone in Ukraine. That is, the national team comes out with such a hodgepodge. But what kind of restriction did they make so that more than half of any residential complex, yes, was not occupied by immigrants from the same country? This means citizenship. That is, this includes blood relatives, in the first degree a spouse, mother, father, and child. Now, for example, there are such rumors that, as if one surname is one real estate. Here we also have, as I say, what I get. How many are there? 4 properties. Yes, yes. And I can't do it for one person either. But I just have a wife and 2 children. There are 4 of us. In principle, it turns out that we all have the same last name. But judging by this paragraph, that is, it turns out, Article 8, Paragraph 11, it says here that no more than half of the total number of apartments, real estate located within one plot cannot be acquired by foreigners who are blood relatives. That is, this is meant in this paragraph. It has already been said that a husband, wife, spouse, and children are not one person. These are different faces. That is, it turns out, according to this point, I can arrange 4 real estate objects just for myself, for my wife, for my daughter, and for my son. You can do the same. Take your relatives, make out, and that's it. The main thing is that your entire property does not make up half of the residential complex. If we take, for example, Caesar Resort, in which there are 6,000 apartments, please, just do not buy 3,000 apartments, do not collect 3,000 relatives. You can collect them, but the main thing is that they do not have the citizenship of the same country. Let there be citizenship of different countries. And then, in principle, everything will be fine. That is, it doesn't really limit anyone either. Although, of course, it sounds so bad that you limit it. And about investors. In order to obtain a purchase permit, investment purposes must be directed to such as the development of tourism, education, healthcare, and industry, with the exception of construction and sale. The investor. Some people have bought a lot of apartments and they are worried. What should they do? But in this law, yes, this is paragraph Article 8, paragraph 12, subparagraph B, it says that they can get permission for investment purposes. That is, for the development of tourism. That is, if renting out it turns out to be the development of tourism. Yes, because you rent out, you give places to people where they can live so that tourists come here. That is, some people have bought 15 to 20 apartments. They pass under this item and can take over any immovable object. Do you understand? Yes, there are no clarifications yet. The law is still raw. But if such a clause exists, then you can arrange it for renting. The only thing is that you will be monitored, which means you have to pay taxes, formalize lease agreements officially, and pay taxes. The rental tax is about 10%. Therefore, well, what if you rent for 30 euros per day, and you spend everything officially? Well, rent for 33 euros per day, and 3 euros will go to taxes. Everything else will go to you, so what to do? To live well in a good country, you need to pay taxes. You've paid your taxes and sleep well. And then there's the same point about investments. For example, I once said in my video that there is a special investment program, Loyal, which applies to large investors who enter Northern Cyprus. Previously, the amount of investment was enough from 2 million euros when you come in, and you could get a lot of privileges. Now they've done it differently. Foreign individuals or legal entities who will invest in the area specified in paragraph B above must deposit at least 20 million euros in their name to banks. That is, they must put money there and invest this money in their investment goals within 2 years. But again, look at what the goals are. That is, point B, the goals are the same. The development of tourism, education, healthcare, and industry, except for the construction and resale of apartments. That is, the same thing for rent. If you want to rent, then please build a hotel. For example, buy and rent a lot of apartments. The only thing, of course, they removed a very large layer of people who, for example, bought 20 apartments. They have already passed 2 million each, and they are already enjoying benefits. Now they need to buy 200 apartments already in order to somehow get under these points. This is, of course, a tightening. This is not a good thing for investors. Well, for a large business, who came in, he is 20 million, in principle, one large-scale construction project, a casino, just a project with land, costs somewhere from 30 to 35 million euros. Therefore, 20 million, of course, large investors will not suffer much here and they will be comfortable. The only thing they have done is another subparagraph that people who come in for investment purposes, that is, they receive a lot of benefits and everything else. They have one condition, that it is impossible to sell and alienate investment properties before the expiration of 5 years. That is, here they introduced a limit of 5 years. If you bought a property for rent, then you don't have to sell it for 5 years. They limit real estate prices because the locals swear. For example, why has everything gone into restriction yet? Because real estate prices have soared twice. The locals even get €1,000 to buy a property that costs €100,000. They also need how much? 100 salaries to receive or set aside this money to buy real estate. It's really hard for them. And so we decided that investors should not speculate, so that there is no speculation. To buy an apartment, resell it, then earn it. That is, to somehow regulate it at the legislative level. If you have entered for investment purposes, then do not sell real estate for at least 5 years. But in principle, we have not had such investors for 5 years yet. Therefore, is it bad or good? I don't know. Well, it's probably not very good, because people who used to come in for short investments, that is, you come in, for example, buying 20 apartments, you want to sell them in a year. The price has increased, you sell in a year. And here it turns out, well, in general, for the purpose of reselling, you see, real estate, this is no longer considered investment goals that are interesting to Northern Cyprus. So you can come in, do healthcare, open a hospital, a hotel, and so on, to develop industry, but not to resell. They are starting to struggle with resellers. What can be done here? This is not a very good way out, because I myself tell everyone that you can invest in Northern Cyprus. Nothing has changed much so far. That is, all the conditions remain the same. You can also buy real estate through developers. To enter, the initial payment is still in pencil. Then, when the foundation begins to fill in, and the price rises, you can leave until nothing has fundamentally changed here. Everything is the same. You can buy 10 to 20 apartments. Just do not register developers yet, while they go to a meeting. You have no contracts registered, and no one from the state knows how much real estate you have. So far, they have not reached this point, and no one has cancelled the trusts yet. Well, let's finish reading the law further. What is written in our law next? If the shares of any company established in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus or registered in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus belong to foreign individuals and legal entities who are not citizens of TRNC, then they can purchase a maximum of 60 dinars of land. That is, for the investment purposes, we are talking about 20 million. Investors can buy 60 dinars of land. It turns out quite a lot if 1 dinar is 13/700ths of a square meter or 0.339 acres of 1 dönüm. For example, we had a casino project for 30 million. There were only 30 dönums of land there. In principle, 30 dönums of land. Even many developers are doing a project now. There is enough land from 12 to 20 dönums. Few people build large projects, so 60 dönums is a good piece of land on which to build a good complex. And of course, they made restrictions. These foreign companies can use this service, buy 60 dönums of land only in one place, that is, use this service only once. This is sad, of course, because many people build in several places. They bought it there, but that doesn't mean anything, since you can create a second company and use both services. I bought 60 there and bought 60 there, and they are for those who recognize Northern Cyprus and for the locals, Turks, and those countries that recognize Northern Cyprus, and these companies are allowed to buy 80 dinars of land. It turns out to be 20 Danube's more, but in fact 80 Danube's is a very huge piece of land. Let's just do the math. 80 times 13, 73 in square meters hundreds. This turns out to be 1,000 acres of land, but basically it's huge. 80 dönums is applied to 241 acres of land. A huge plot. I had 186 acres in Russia, but here there are 1,000 10,000, that's 10 times more. There is generally a huge plot. If, before or after the disappearance of this force, in truth, a violation of paragraph 4 and above, shares are physically and legally transferred from a foreigner to an individual who is a citizen of the Northern Cyprus, then it is necessary to obtain prior permission. That is, after the release of this law, foreigners came in with investments, for example, and now they get that they have more land than they should, and they, of course, transfer this case to the trust. It says here that you need to get a preliminary permit from the ministry, from the Council of Ministers for construction, for sale, or investment. That is, even you transfer to a local, if the land was already yours, then you will also need to get permission. But I think there will be no problems with this, because any country is interested in investing. And when I first heard about this law, I also thought that they had passed a law that should not be at all. Rarely does anyone buy these huge plots of land, which contain more than 60 dunams. And it turns out chapter 149, subparagraph 17, despite anything else in the law of contracts or any other law, individuals and legal entities wishing to bring real estate in excess of the acquired real estate recognized in this law cannot conclude a trust management agreement. That is, if you have already bought 60 dunams of land, then you want to buy 60 more dunams of land, you open a trust and there you buy more land through trust management. They write that this should not happen. That would be illegal. Cannot. But there are no fines here. It turns out because they just won't give you permission to buy a second piece of land. That is, it turns out that this one does not exist. Well, the most unpleasant points, which have been introduced into the legislation. Previously, it was clear that you, as a foreigner, can only buy one piece of land, and you have to register it, pay taxes, and people, it is clear that they did not pay any taxes. They decided here, in order to somehow encourage people to pay these taxes, they came up with fines, and moreover, the fines are just crazy. Let me read it to you. Any person who violates the provisions of this law commits a crime, and in case of conviction, that is, through the court, that is, only the court can convict, that is, it is subject to a fine of 100 times, from 100 times to 300 times the current minimum wage, gross, or imprisonment for up to 3 years, or both combined. Can you imagine that the fine is 100 times and 300 times the minimum wage? That is, the minimum wage is 1,000 euros. That is, the fine will be from 100 to 300,000 euros if a person violates the provisions of this law. It's just a plague, of course. But, you see, the law is still raw, and it is not specifically written here for which violation the provision is. That is, it turns out that a person cannot take over more than one real estate object, but he will not take it out. What is the fine here? Or about deadlines? Yes, for example. But so far we have only considered the timing of receiving the head. Well, it also said that if you did not receive it in time, then it will be cancelled. You're applying for permission a second time. What do fines have to do with it? It feels like this law, these fines, were just written to scare people, and what they are superimposed on is not written here. Because if you can't buy two objects, then how will you buy them? You can't buy them in any way. According to the terms of registration, the only thing we have read is about obtaining the title. That if you have the title ready, then you must receive it in 75 days and pay for it within 30 days. And it is immediately written that if you did not receive it and did not pay, then you will receive it a second time. You will pay twice as much, not 7,000 liri, but 14,000 liri. That is, you will pay an additional 7,000 liras. But 7,000 lira is not 100,000 euros. And what to pay 100,000 for is still not entirely clear. An individual and a legal entity concluding contracts for the purchase and sale or trust management of movable property without specifying a date. What is the catch? Why people do not pay when buying real estate? Because now we all conclude a contract for the sale. It turns out they are everywhere without a date. Well, here we have, of course, with a date. The date is December 26, 2023. That is, this is a contract with a date. And basically, They usually do not write the date. Then, as we see, the date is written with a pen, because the date was written when contracts were already being registered in the land registry. And so usually, if a person takes an equity part in the construction in order, for example, to go in with a pencil and then go out on the foundation, then, of course, no one puts up to the date, to avoid paying this extra 5%. And here they write that if a person does not register their contract or delivers it without a date, then they get in. Such people will be taken action immediately after detection. That is, they must first detect and then take action. It is still unclear what measures will be taken. The same fines will be provided, but it will generally be a tin. Our law is coming to an end. A temporary article. The status of existing purchase and sale agreements. Foreign individuals or legal entities who entered into a purchase and sale agreement before the entry into force of this law are required to apply to the relevant taboos within 75 working days, namely working days from the date of entry into force of this law, in order to register their purchase and sale agreements. That is, 75 days are given for old contracts so that they can register them. But in fact, I do not know why they give 75 days. Well, because they also understand that the developer will set the date for them, but according to their law, after concluding the purchase and sale agreement, you must register within 21 days so as not to receive any penalties. In this law, they write that 75 days are given. And it is immediately written, if you happen to have a whole bunch of real estate, more than one, then in order to bring all your objects according to this law, arrange all your objects for your relatives and so on, then you are given 1 year. That is, until May 21st, 2025. That is, those people who we bought a lot of real estate. 2. Do not worry. It takes a whole year to arrange everything in the right way. 1 year is given. And it turns out that the same applies to a trust agreement on the acquisition of real estate by foreigners. That is, trusts. Before the entry into force of this law, 75 working days are given to formalize this case. But it is written that if you have any real estate objects in litigation, then it is clear that the courts and so on can also shed an additional 6 months. And, basically, that's it. That's the whole of this law. That is, as I said, there is nothing new in the law. They scared in the law on penalties, made restrictions. But there has been talk of restrictions for foreigners for a long time. It was envisaged that there should be no more than 75% of foreigners. But in fact, the law does not say anything like that. That is, no more than half of the citizens of one country, citizens with passports of one country, to be occupied. There is no such thing anywhere. That is, it's just a statistic. They just looked at the statistics, they introduced it for people who are not knowledgeable. It seems that yes, so they made a restriction for Ibanji. In fact, there are no new restrictions for Ibanji. Everything that was old remains the same. Also, there was only one real estate for a foreigner, and also there was one real estate left. There are no restrictions in principle. That is, in principle everything is fine. Such a parable. 2 shoe sellers came to the island as Papuans. They get off the ship and one of them grabs his head. Oh, it's all gone. It's all gone. And the other one is running around happy. So happy. Oh, super. We'll start a business here. Because we have no competition. No one wears shoes. We will sell them a lot of shoes now. And everyone will be happy and satisfied. And we'll make a lot of money too. Because we have no competitors. We're going to be the only ones on the island. It's great. And the first one who cries, oh, how bad, how bad. They won't buy anything at all. They don't have shoes at all. That is, in principle, both are right. Therefore, what is your view of life? This is how your life will be. It all depends on yourself, on your conclusions, on your mood, on what you want. The island is very magnificent. The sea is gorgeous here. The weather is wonderful. Yes, everything has gone up a little bit here. But if we look at it, it has gone up all over the world. It's just that everything has gone up in price all over the world. So real estate is also growing. But until now, real estate here is still much cheaper than in Europe and much cheaper than in Southern Cyprus. Cyprus. That's why the prices here are great. My past videos about market analysis and market analysis of other countries are also available. If you want, take a look. I don't see anything wrong with that, and neither does this law. That's why I'm sad. I don't see any point. Everything is fine. A contract? Yes, you need to register, but nothing will change for investors. I think there will be clarifications from the developers. Everything will be fine. I have a friend who owns 16 properties. She was also scared when she read the law for the first time. No one really reads the law himself, because the law is in Turkish and needs to be translated. Everyone looked at it like that. Someone said something there. Everyone was scared. And the boss says, "Don't worry. We'll arrange everything for you as an investment, that you're not for yourself. Anyway, you won't live in 16 houses. You're going to rent it out anyway. We will arrange a lease and everything will be fine for you. Don't worry. So please don't worry. Everything is fine." I would like to tell you another such interesting parable about our thinking. Yes, the government of Northern Cyprus lacks a little bit of opportunities to look at the space more broadly. For example, here is the reason about the monkey. The monkeys decided to conduct an experiment. They gave a baton and gave it bananas. And so, bananas began to hang higher and higher. At first she took them off like that. Then she began to beat them with a baton. She also began to take it off. Then they hung it even higher, and she can't get the baton anymore. He jumps, but he wants to eat, but he can't get it. But there's a stool in the room, and the monkey can't figure out that. Stand on the stool and you'll go to another level, and please, you'll sing. She doesn't understand. They put a stool even closer to her there so that she can see it. She can sit on it, relax. Then he picks up the baton again and jumps. They tell her, well, take a stool, and it will be easier with a stool. She takes a stool, tries with a stool, but it's hard, and it won't at any height. Also, the government of the Northern Dnieper is doing a little bit wrong, as I think. On the contrary, they need to give foreigners as many privileges as possible. Yes, there was one mistake with Palestine, that the Jewish state of Israel, it just formed. Education turned out, and it just started to grow. You don't make a state within your state. Well, you've imposed restrictions so that 20% of them are local. Yes, and there will be no state completely. To avoid government entities, look at the experience of Dubai, the experience of Singapore, please, and everything can be done well. On the contrary, reduce taxes. If the locals are outraged that they cannot buy an apartment, then you force the developers to give the local population a discount, for example, of 30%, and then the locals will buy at a discount of 30% from the developers. Maybe this 30% will fall on all other people, but it won't be so noticeable. It will be quite normal, and the locals will be happy, and the foreigners will be happy, just so that there is no speculation. Local people should be restricted so that they do not sell this property for 5 years, so that they also do not speculate and earn money from foreigners. That's it, please. Or, for example, if you want to collect more taxes, you move to another area. Registration. Okay, let's make it 5%. Do you want to collect 5%? Well, collect it if you look at how they collect 5% VAT in South Cyprus. But you only have to pay once, so that a person pays once, and then reselling the property, the new buyer would not pay, and then everyone would register real estate. Because if a person comes in for investment purposes, he will pay, and he understands that the same 12% will be paid by a new buyer. That is, it does not turn out to be very attractive for investment. Therefore, such people are looking for workarounds to avoid paying these taxes, and there will still be ways. Here, without the date of the contracts, this is already a workaround to avoid paying any taxes. You just made a contract without a date, and then the contract is terminated and a new one is concluded. The old contract was broken. The new owner, if he had already bought for himself, he went and registered. So far, according to this law, nothing will change. Therefore, please, if you are interested in this topic, please leave your comments. What do you think about the new law on the acquisition of real estate by foreigners in Northern Cyprus? Please leave your comments and share this video with your friends. Let me tell you an interesting parable. There is no need to listen to various specialists. You just think for yourself or contact the person you trust the most. For example, there is such a parable. I once told it in one of my videos. One guy, he had a constant headache. He was just suffering from headaches. He turned to a bunch of specialists. He will go to one doctor. He will go to the second. As a result, he spent a whole bunch of money. and they told him not to have a headache. Your problems are all in the balls, then they need to be cut off, castrated, then the head will not hurt. He was all upset, of course. Well, what to do? Damn it. My head was tormented. Such pains were crazy headaches. He says, okay, nuts. He paid a lot of money. They cut him off. That's it. He's coming out of the clinic. I'm all happy and happy. My head doesn't hurt. Of course. It's sad that there are no eggs. But well, what to do? But that's it. My head doesn't hurt. Happy. He thinks I'm going to go buy myself a suit now. At least I'll dress up like a person. I'll live normally. He goes into the store, and there's such an old grandfather tells him that there are good suits for you. You have a 48 suit size. He says, but how do you know? Grandpa says I've been in business for a long time. I know what you need. We put on a suit. The suit really sat down like in a cast. The first one says, how do you know? Grandfather, I know everything. Let's find you a shirt. Let's, he says, well, your collar turns out to be 42. The shirt size is 48 there. Yes, that's right. How do you know that? I am an expert in this field. Well done. I bought a belt. Here you have such a waist. The belt also fit. The first one, well, come on then. I've already bought everything. He says, then let's also buy underpants. To the pile. Here you are. Your size is there. I do not know. 50 is the size of underpants. The first one says, oh, that's where you made a mistake. I'm wearing the 46th. Grandfather says, how can you wear 46 like that? What are you doing? It turns out that your tight underpants will squeeze your testicles. Blood will not flow. As a result, there will be very big headaches. You will suffer from a headache. Why do you need this? Just take the size I'm giving you. And the guy thinks, no way to himself. It probably turned out the same way, because he had headaches. Yes, and he wore such underpants. And in fact, it was just necessary to contact the right specialist. The moral is this, choose the right specialist to contact in order not to lose your money, but to earn well, invest and live well. The best island in the world is the island of Cyprus. Therefore, please contact, write, call. I will always answer you. I will tell you everything. Contact the experts and everything will be wonderful and cool. Recently, a girl came to us. She was selling an apartment. They told her everything too. Don't sell it. You'll pay so much money. They'll rip you off like a stick. We agreed with her right away. I won't name the prices, but the apartment costs about 100,000. I tell her that, well, yes, since you are selling, it has just been built, especially at Caesars, it will be an assignment of 3,000. There will be a difference in taxes of 11.75. It will cost so much. You will also need to close your installment plan with this money. Pay your VAT. Traffic fee. Well, we all figured it out, decided what she would pay for, and what the buyer would pay for, and the deal happened. She thought for a long time, sat in Caesar's office for an hour because she was so scared. She communicated with a bunch of realtors who said, yes, you will be robbed, deceived. That is, as we agreed with her, as everything was calculated on a piece of paper initially. She received so much money one by one, and there were no additional payments. Therefore, please do not listen to anyone. Everything is fine in Northern Cyprus, and most of the people here are still adequate, reasonable, and good. So have a nice shopping, have a nice day. Come to Northern Cyprus, and the law will still be redone. I think that all these penalties may be removed. Maybe there will be some benefits. The elections, as we say, will be in a year, and in a year everything will be fine and wonderful. Today is Sunday. I write videos when no one is bothering. Tomorrow, Monday, there will be a general strike in Northern Cyprus, because people understand that if some new law is released, life will become more difficult. They are trying to regulate something. How can something be regulated? For example, I don't understand. How can you regulate, for example, gasoline prices? Yes, for example, if oil becomes more expensive on the market, jumps like this, then up, then down, then it turns out that the price of gasoline will also jump. The same goes for meat and real estate. And everything else. Yes, there is no need to regulate anything. You relax, let it go as it goes. There are market mechanisms that regulate themselves. You just make sure that there are no monopolies. If there are no monopolies, then there is no collusion. Then all prices will be fine. If you have a whole bunch of producers of this meat, I do not know, there are more than 300 farms, then it is clear that all 300 of them cannot be copied among themselves to raise the price. They just want to survive because everything has gone up up in price. And if meat cost 700 lira per kilogram and you made 400 at the state level, so what are you doing? Well, it's just that the farmers will close and there will be no meat at all. I mean, actually, well, think about the stool. You need it for some reason. Look at other countries, hire some good top manager who actually understands macroeconomics, and everything will be fine. Therefore, I believe that reason will come to power in Northern Cyprus and everything will be wonderful and good. Therefore, have a good day, good shopping, and good mood. We are waiting for you to visit. Sincerely, Oleg Konevin. Of course, it is a pity that the land was limited, because, for example, I have a plot of 5 denims at the villa. It was done according to the old rules. Because, well, what is one tribute? Here's one tribute. This is my playground where the car is parked, right? Well, how is it done here? We did it a little differently. I'll show you now. This is our site. Is big. And 5 denims were made. Behind one fence. By the way, yes, we are cleaning, pruning. And here, it turns out, we just end up with 2.5 denims. And there the garden just goes on. Here, so, if you have a large plot, and you did not have time to arrange it, then it turns out that you can do as I did. You just fence off 2.5 denims, and the other 2 denims just make a garden. That's all. And you can arrange that garden for someone else. Well, yes, it turns out now, according to the new rules, only 1 denim. Well, 1 denim was made for each relative, cut, and that's it. That is, there is always a way out of any situation. If you are interested, write or call. I'll tell you everything for sure. While I was editing my video, there were already many videos on YouTube. Various specialists, lawyers, professors. Sometimes my ears even curl up when they tell me what this law is about. For example, in one complex, as I have already said, there were no more than 50% of people of the same nationality. Not one nationality, but one passport. That is, it is by citizenship that the passport is issued. Russians, for example, but they have a German, Turkish, Israeli, Russian, Belarusian passport. This does not mean that they are all 50% Russian. Specialists who are 18 years old, they did not even know that you can buy a house that costs 5 denims. They thought they were on 3 denims, now on 2. 5 denims. Here I showed the video, my house also stands on 5 denims. How did I do this? It's like he's standing on 5 donuts. For investors, the most important thing is for the country to have some kind of stability. And this country, Northern Cyprus, shows that there is no stability. Because in fact, new laws, new amendments, they really scare people. But so, if you look at it by and large, there is nothing new. They just imposed penalties. Penalties, of course, they are very frightening. It's just such a fear. They announced a fine of 100,000 to 300,000 euros. And who will invest in such a country, being afraid of such fines? And in order not to make a mistake, you need to contact the right agency that knows professionally and conducts its activities legally, observing the laws. And you won't have any problems. I also made a video once, showing that there is a concept of customs clearance of the phone. And when you bring your phone for customs clearance, they don't look for your phone number on the computer, they look for it on a piece of paper. Basically nothing has been digitized here at all. Everything is on paper. And how will they regulate how many people live in the complex? How they will calculate it, how they will calculate these percentages, is generally unclear. The same goes for accounting. There is nothing to be afraid of, as long as nothing has changed, but the fact that investors come in there and say that they need to register the contract immediately. In fact, the developer also understands that if they now start forcing all investors to register a contract, the investor will immediately lose 26.5% of the profit. Well, who would want to do that? Therefore, there will be other contracts, for example, not a contract of sale, but a contract of intent to buy, but such a contract of intent, right? A certain payment schedule will be prescribed. It also falls under the rules of the laws. But everything will be official, everything will be legal. So there are always options, nothing terrible happened. As a last resort, you can apply for relatives. This law is more concerned with developers, because in this law they legalized such a provision that the developer does not have the right to sell apartments if he does not yet have a construction permit. And here it turns out that a lot of developers build, and only then get a construction permit. They should get a title that can be shared in the future. What do many developers in Northern Cyprus do? The fact is that they have just agreed on the purchase of land and the start of sales is already beginning. They haven't even bought a plot yet, the project hasn't been agreed yet. Imagine, the project has not yet been agreed, but the start of sales has already started, and they have already raised money, because we also have neighbors, a neighboring office. They had such a situation, they built a complex of villas. It's good that we realized something was wrong with them and we didn't participate in this project. We are very demanding in choosing a developer for our investors with whom we will work. And how did that developer do it? They just made a delicious agreement with the owner of the land that they would buy this land, give him £450,000 there and build him 3 villas. The fact that this is his site. What is the result? They have already started selling these villas, that is, they have already sold 30% of the villas there, people have paid the first installment, but they have not even paid off the landowner. And they couldn't give him the 450,000. And the owner just said, well, guys, it's not done the same way, let's do it wisely. I waited another half a year, they collected even more money, but they did not give anything to the owner. Well, the owner is clear that the owner terminated the contract with them. They have collected money, but there is no land. I do not know what happened next. And in the beginning, even the president was invited to the presentation of the project. The president came. It turns out that they framed the president. And since they had an office next door, we found out that all the guys who worked in this office were left without a salary. He didn't even give anyone a salary, because he had such a situation. This law, it actually insures buyers against such risks. If the developer has all the documents on hand, then it will be possible to enter more boldly. The law supports buyers more. The contract is considered concluded and it can be brought to court if it has a mark of a state body on it. If we are talking about real estate, then there must be a mark of the land committee or according to our TAP, locally called TAPU, and the seal of the tax office. These seals must be mandatory. Without these seals, without the stamps that are pasted there, the contract is considered not concluded. Therefore, the government wants to raise money and, on the other hand, protect the consumer. That is, in principle, there is nothing so bad. There are always workarounds to avoid paying these same percentages, they are interesting. Who needs advice? Please write, call and we will find a way out of your situation. And the last question, who is affected by this law today? Those people who have been living in Northern Cyprus for a long time, who have bought apartments for a long time, but have not issued a caption or title to the property. Because, for example, even in the 19th year, the title was worth only 1%. Imagine, 1%. And people thought it was expensive, and they didn't want to pay. But now they are forced, it turns out, already under the new law to pay 12%. Imagine if you could pay 1%, and now 12%. What was going on here? To get a residence permit, you can get a residence permit for rent, but you need to show more money. And you can get a residence permit for the property. For the property, you just need to pay 35% for the apartment and get a certificate from Mukta, and that's it. You can apply for a residence permit for the purchase, but you need to apply for permission from the ministry, get permission as a foreigner to buy real estate. You collect these documents, send them to the ministry, and they just give you a number, yes, which is called DOSY. That's why DOSY was given, and a residence permit is given for the property. That is, people have submitted a permit, they have already received this permit, maybe they got it, but they do not receive it, because they do not understand that they will receive a permit, then they will need to pay for it. That is, at least it used to be 3%, but now you will need to pay 12%. Therefore, these people, of course, did not fall under this law. That is, it turns out that they already had this permission, they did not receive it. What do they need to do now? First, you need to contact the ministry back, find out what state their permit is in, because the permit also cannot lie forever. It may have been there for 2 or 3 years, and it may have already been cancelled. Then he will have to submit it again. For submitting a permit, just to apply for a permit, it used to be practically free. Now it costs, the first submission is 7,000 liras. After the release of the permit, you have it for all 30 working days to pay for this permit. And you have already completed everything in 75 working days. You get permission, go to TAPU. In TAPU you calculate how much you have to pay. With these calculations, you go to the bank, pay, then go back to TAPU, and you already receive a head or a certificate of ownership. So the basic law very much, of course, affects the old owners who live here without having issued a head. What should people do? Sell your property so as not to pay these 6 or 12% and keep it for yourself. Well, of course, if you like living here in this country, then why sell? Well, what should I do? Taxes must always be paid. There is a saying, pay your taxes and sleep well. That's why I think it's better to just pay taxes and live in peace. And, please, do not listen to many experts who say something there, or read this law yourself. In principle, everything is clearly written there. Well, take a Google translator or a translator and translate it. It's not that big. Everything is described in detail in the law. So have a nice day to everyone. Who liked my video, like it, share it with your friends and leave your comments, and of course come to Northern Cyprus.